What is fascism? Okay, so fascism's a very complicated topic to explain. So I'm gonna need to understand like your level of knowledge on the topic in general and why exactly you're asking. Like, is this the first time you're hearing the word before? Yeah, at the end of the day, they took they took huge amounts of resources, so now they have huge amounts more free time, and now they get to do the writing, they get to do all that shit. They get to have, more time on social media than anyone else. And since they've taken up so much more space, then they've been able to focus on recruitment. There's so many more of them than ever before. They've been gaining power. It's not like their resources were taken away. Sure, they no longer control the government TM as much. But they control the capital. And we make way more decisions with capital than, other aspects of state. Anyways, Festive Puppet, I was talking to you a minute ago. If you are interested in hearing more about what fascism is specifically, I need to know where your understanding of the topic is. I need to know if, like, this is the first time you've heard the word. If you're asking from, like, one anarchist to another, what my specific understanding of it is, or something like that. Because how I'm going to explain it is going to be very different based on who I'm talking to. Not really much? Okay. So, fascism, above everything else, is an alliance of power. So, who specifically is a fascist can change over time. It's not, inherent to any specific group or anything, and it's not even always a coherent political ideology. The ideology behind it often, can change over time. Their justifications for their actions is often all over the place. What remains is the fact that it's an alliance of, what tends to be the group in power in the society. And it is an ideology about the justification and solidification of justifications for that power. It's taking the fact that they have power and saying that that power is innate and should be treated as the only power in society and is justified based on its existence, right? Under capitalism, we say, oh, free markets give you power, etc., etc. Like, if people have power, they, quote, earned it because, they're good at working hard or whatever, which is obviously false, obviously not how it works, but the justification is in the system, the justification is in the relations between people. When it comes to fascism, they say, okay, actually, this power I have, this is because I'm inherently better than everyone else. The class I'm a part of is inherently better than everyone else. Not because they work harder or whatever, but because of some inherent aspect of them. For example, the idea that them as a social class are smarter. And you have to remember, different classes all tend to work just as hard under capitalism, especially the poor people. Right? Like, it's more expensive to be poor than rich. You have to, spend money on, short-term things that are more likely to break, for example. Like, a common example is a pair of shoes. If you buy a cheap pair of shoes, they wear out much faster than a good pair of shoes. They might wear out 3 times faster, and the good pair of shoes might only cost 2 times as much, so you save a ton of money buying the good pair of shoes. But if you don't have the money for the good pair of shoes, you're stuck buying that cheap pair of shoes over and over again. So under capitalism, regardless of their justification, specific social classes will gain this power. Will maintain their position because they started out rich, so they end up rich. In the United States, white people are a good example of that, right? They took huge amounts of resources from black people and indigenous people. The whole slavery thing and genocide thing. Right, so black people in the United States, they were starting out as not having any property, not having any resources, not even having as much skills and knowledge because they were, hard laborers and, slaves and such. Many of them didn't know how to read and write. And that was something they had to learn later. And so they ended up in a position where as a social class they had much less resources than the white people. And so fascism is essentially the act of noticing this and saying, hey, this social class has less resources, I have more resources. I don't care what the justification of capitalism is, like harder working or etc., etc. It's actually innate to me, I deserve this power because I have this power, it's good. Let's just forego all the formalities, all the markets and stuff, and say, I get to tell them what to do because, for example, they are white. Right? So it's basically cutting out all the middle shit. Cutting out the fact that, the justification based on how much money is in your bank account, for example, being able to tell, a different person what to do. It's just, how do I put it? Cutting out all the justifications for the power and simply acknowledging the power as it is. And then seizing more of it that way. That is what fascism is. And I hope that's making sense so far. That's why we have terms like scratch a liberal, a fascist bleeds. The people who believe in these structures of power that lead to these social groups that are, controlled and, forced to be distinct in this way. Through the nature of capitalism and stuff like that. Aren't very different from the people who, believe that it is inherent or should be codified directly. Codified directly. But obviously, either way, these power relations aren't actually inherent. Why they are isn't actually why they say they are. The liberals and fascists say they are. And at the end of the day, we can just choose to not do it. So fascists in general are an alliance of the people who directly benefit from this. Mission begins in 30 seconds. Directly benefit from, taking these, power relations that already exist and strengthening them and then writing them themselves into law. Because one thing they're constantly scared of is the idea that if they did it in the system that exists, then it can be done back to them. But if they write it directly into law, that these relations as they exist right now should always exist, then it might not tip back the other way. is generally where it comes from. So, one way you could think of it is taking the soft power that these groups have cultivated over many years, and then solidifying it into hard power. One thing the Nazis did, Nazis are an example of fascists. The word fascism specifically, we'll talk about that a little bit first, comes from Mussolini specifically. He was a dictator, a few years before Hitler. And, I believe Hitler described himself in terms of the fascist ideology that Mussolini made. It was a very new thing at that point. But Hitler and Mussolini were, the first fascist leaders. So, Germany, Nazi Germany specifically, is a great example of it. What they did was, in general, seized huge amounts of land and resources from Jewish people, is what they did in Nazi Germany. Right? They didn't just kill all the Jewish people. They also targeted many other groups, but they specifically took their land, took their houses, took their clothes even. The killing was almost secondary, near the end of the war to prevent them from getting their stuff back. It was mainly, especially at first, simply to get at their things. It was the fascist people realizing, hey, I have the power to take everything I want from Jewish people. Let's do it. Let's take this stuff, make sure we have this stuff, and then make sure we get to hold on to it into the future. So then society from there uses that as a basis. Now the fascists have all this property, and it wasn't returned to Jewish people. The fascists still had it. So, victims of the Holocaust in Germany tend to live in poverty. And they almost all ended up leaving Germany because of the anti-Semitism and the poverty. But that's a whole other conversation. And so the best way to describe fascism is solidifying this power they already have. Taking this power they already have and putting it into a situation, a resource that can't be taken away. Like houses, like clothes, like time for education, and things of that nature. And they often do this in response to hardship. They're like, after World War I, Germany was forced to pay back huge amounts of debt and things like that. So they had hardship, so they were at risk of losing their status as, better than everyone else, those fascists in, Germany. As being able to demand what they wanted from them when they wanted it. So essentially they took everything they could before they lost their power. And then eventually, sure, they lost that huge amount of power they had, but they already had this stuff taken. So by that point, it didn't matter. They could build that soft power again, and that crystallized power was not easily taken away. So Festive Puppet, is what I'm saying making sense to you? I want to make sure there's no bits I have to re-explain or anything. And if there's anything you don't get, I can definitely re-explain. Just don't want to get too deep without you, with you not understanding this stuff. If you don't. You know what I mean. Yeah, well. And everyone else here, y'all understanding it as well? Is what I'm saying making sense? But yeah, the easiest way to defeat fascism is to understand first and foremost that it already exists as a possibility in, all liberal systems. They can go fascist at any moment, and will at any perceived threat. In an attempt to solidify these relations to, make sure the resources they've gained from them can't be taken away. And of course, how do I put it? That's something we gotta watch out for whenever we're doing anything. Because the second they have the opportunity and realize, hey, we gotta do this, they're gonna do fascism on us. They're gonna try and kill us all. Whenever we show, hey, maybe a better world is possible. Because there were revolutions in other countries, like revolutions in Russia and Spain, for example. As the Nazis were taken, before and as the Nazis were taking power, and they were realizing, hey, there's a possibility for that here too. We gotta, seize power before it's too late. But yeah. So the biggest way to defeat it is to undermine it. Is to specifically chip away at the power they have in general. Is to understand that there's no particular fascist that holds all the power they have. That it's within the systems that already exist. And so fighting someone like Donald Trump TM isn't going to help you any more than fighting any other capitalist politician. Because that's not where the power lies. And if that's not where the power lies, attacking it isn't going to do anything. This is a rather interesting interpretation of fascism I heard from an anarchist ever, I admit. I am not an anarchist myself, nor that left, but I seek to understand how political sides define ideologies. Thank you for your explanation. I see. See, I knew that something was up there, the way you asked that first question. Could have just said, hey, how does an anarchist define fascism? Because I could have done it in a much shorter way as well. Talked about how, the best quote I've seen on it is that it's just colonialism taken home. They use the same tactics in Nazi Germany that they used in the Mexican-American War, for example. Like, it was straight up a guy from the Mexican-American War, who saw them using the fucking gas chambers in there, that said, hey, I'm gonna sell you Cyclone B. Use it for this. You got fucking rich off that shit. It's literally just them doing colonialism at home. It ain't special, it's literally the stuff we see every single day. The only difference is you consider the people there, slightly more people, so it's a slightly bigger tragedy, TM. You in the general sense. But there was little that's special about it. They killed as many people in the colonization of the Americas. The United States had concentration camps during World War II. One of the AfD politicians had an interview with Musk, and I saw a video on it recommended to me, and my thumbnail had text on it saying Hitler was a leftist. Yeah. Choosing the word socialist is still doing fucking work for them today. Look at that shit. All they need is that plausible deniability day after day.